the advice from the last speaker, Kath Baxter. I'm now sitting on the edge of my seat and with my feet up flat on the floor. Okay, so I hope you all had a good lunch. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to introduce Councillor Sharon Thompson. Now, Councillor Sharon Thompson is going to be talking to us about maintaining balance, protecting your well-being, so that you can contribute your best to work. She'll be talking about flexible working as an enabler for women in leadership, and also prioritising your well-being and seeking that support when you need it, and pushing against that perfectionism that a lot of us actually suffer from. So I'm just going to say a few words about Sharon before I hand over to her. So Councillor Sharon Thompson has been a councillor since 2014, and she served, and that's at Birmingham City Council, and she served as Victims Champion for the city from 2014 to 2015. She's the authority's first ambassador for addressing homelessness and rough sleeping, and she has a political leadership responsibility for many areas. Sharon is a strong advocate of collaborative partnership. I agree wholeheartedly with an authentic and inclusive approach to leadership. Sharon sat on the Commonwealth Games 2022 member advisory group, and she's currently the local authority representative on West Midlands Combined Authority Housing and Delivery Board, amongst others. I won't mention them all. And Sharon also sits on the LGA Labour Women's Task Force. So without further ado, if I hand over to you, Sharon.
Thank you very much. And I see that it's been a great day so far. So, and thank you very much for inviting me to come and be a part of today. I think it's been fantastic. I'll be taking some things back to me within my virtual working space. But what I really wanted to talk about, really, I'm going to share my screen, which I think we've all become familiar with since we've been on lockdown. Let's go to animations. Preview. Can we see that? Yeah, great stuff.
Just pop it into full presentation mode.
Oh, bear with me. Here we go, technology. Slideshow from the beginning. There you go, brilliant, fantastic. So really it's about maintaining balance and protecting your well-being to contribute your best at work. And I think for many of us that work in local government, we are juggling many things. And if you're managing or you're in a position of leadership, it can be particularly challenging and very easy to put ourselves at the back of that list. And as we know, pretty much the regular things that happen without COVID-19 is that life can be certainly difficult and chaotic at times, but with COVID-19, there's been a level of uncertainty. There's definitely been stressful moments for us. Many women are primary caretakers of children, parents, and also partners. And there's sometimes a lack of control and worry around loneliness, homeschooling for the children and online, financial concerns, and everything that happens to us in a normal day-to-day basis, running our lives outside of the work content. So these can be very stressful at times. It means that sometimes we can struggle with our sleep. I know that I have had periods like that depending on what was going on. Some people suffer from headaches, tiredness, and there's a whole range of things that people go through. And again, I think we've probably already heard this already, that working carers dilemma, that many women have real caring responsibilities outside of the day-to-day job. There's a host of reasons behind this, ranging from the fact that we're predominant carers, and that's not just of children, that can also be of our parents. I know my mum has particularly been on my phone consistently throughout COVID-19 and giving me a whole task of things to do. And I'm sure I'm not the only one that has been through that. And many of us are mothers, and if anything's like me, where sometimes we feel guilty of either not being at home enough or not being able to give our full attention. And that's something that sometimes men don't suffer with as much as we do, because I think that women are more intentional in our thinking. We do, from that maternal instinct from time to time, feel like that. And we have a lot of things that we're juggling throughout the day. So I think it's really important that when we're talking about the self-care, that we also take some of that into consideration and really at times give ourselves a pat on the back for everything that we're doing, not just in the workplace, but everything that we're juggling holistically. Then also there comes a time in life when we will all face the menopause at some point. And it's about making sure that, you know, that the workplace has an understanding of what that feels like for women, and that things are put into place. I know at the council there is a strategy around working with people who are going through the menopause. There's a group that's been set up, and they are very supportive of each other throughout that. And this is particularly important because some people don't realise the impact that it has, whether it's to do with poor lighting, whether it's to do with the fact the way you're feeling emotionally. All of these have an impact on our well-being in its entirety, but also how we perform in the daytime. And I know for me, I haven't gone through the menopause, but I do suffer from brain fog from time to time. So it's about making sure that we really understand ourselves as women, what we go through and what really triggers us at different points throughout the day and throughout the week, what makes things more stressful for us, and how do we combat some of that. And I'm going to give you some of the tips and tricks of the things that I do in my own personal life throughout that. But the key things that I really want to talk about is self-care. How can I support myself? Team. How can our team support each other? And the manager role. How can my manager support me? And the organisation. How can my organisation support me? Now, we all know that when you're pointing the finger outwards, there's fingers pointing back at you. So it's not just about what you get, but also what are you giving into those relationships? So self-care, what it isn't, is it is not selfish. And sometimes we need to get out of that mindset of actually thinking that we should feel guilty for taking care of ourselves. It's not the same as giving yourself a treat. It's about more than that. It's about, it's not as glamorous, and it is more than that. It's about making sure that you are getting enough sleep, that you are having exercise, that you are keeping hydrated, that you are eating at regular intervals, and actually that you're not just striving for perfection, because sometimes when we try to schedule in self-help and we're living a life that's based around perfection, what often happens is that it's really about trying not to be a failure in a certain area. So it's really, I think it's really important that as women that we really take this on board. Now, I was reflecting on what I was going to say when it came to self-help, and self-care, and I was actually reflecting more so over the last few months of COVID-19 and my experiences of self-care. And actually, I think I went through a period where I went from self-care to almost no care. And that was on the basis of there was so much going on. There was so much things to organise, to make decisions on. There was the things that were happening in the work context that were affecting the city. I look after homelessness, I look after bereavement services, so it was particularly busy. And then also managing the dynamics of being at home, which I wasn't particularly used to working at home. So all of a sudden my home space had become my workspace. And I found at one point that, and I'll be brutally honest, I found at one point that I felt like I was almost speed dating through local government. And what I actually mean by that is that I felt at one point where we was going from Teams meeting and Zoom meeting, one to another, back to back, literally 1 till 12, ding, onto the next one, and not really having a break and making sure we scheduled in that time. And I think one day I got to the point where I was actually back to back in meetings all day. There was no breaks that had been put in by the office. And I thought to myself, do you know, I'm going to get to the point where I'm going to actually end up taking the laptop upstairs with me on mute just to use the toilet. And that's not really about, that's not self-care. And I realised at that point, I needed to stop and I needed to have a word with myself. And I think that's the key, one of the key things about self-care is that we do have to stop and we do need to have that grown-up conversation with ourselves and check in to make sure that we are okay. And we need to be intentional about that. And that's about having that level of self-awareness. And there was a couple of strategies that I put in place, but one of the things was about setting myself realistic boundaries for myself in terms of how I was going to manage the diary, how I was going to manage myself. And it was being really clear with myself that I wasn't, self-care for me wasn't fitting self-care around the diary. The diary needed to fit around what's the best times and days for me, because I know I'm an early bird, so the best time for me to have downtime where I'm nobody's mom, I'm nobody's boss, I'm just Sharon by myself is first thing in the morning. Not everybody's like that. I also knew that different points of the day where I'm more likely to get more hungry or get more tired or get fatigued throughout the day. And that was where I needed to schedule in self-care for myself. And this was about being strict with the diary. So in my diary now, I made sure I timed in spaces that literally said, strictly no meeting, whether that was thinking time, whether that was to walk around the house because you wasn't going by the coffee machine or anything anymore. And it was just about making sure that I had that little bit of space and time for me, to be me, to go to the toilet, to read for 5 minutes, to go for a walk, just to have that level of break throughout the day. And also making sure that I had all my resources around me, making sure that I had bottles of water, making sure that I had those key things like lunch, and also building in things and trying new stuff. We was virtually online. So it was looking at, you know, did I want to do yoga online? Was I going to get creative? And one of the things that I started to do was started writing. And that wasn't something that I naturally would have done before, but I started to build up time within, you know, my own space and my own time where I started to do writing, and that actually helped me to become less stressful. And it was more creative writing as well. So whether that's the gym or anything else, we need to find ways that we can build into our lives that help us to de-stress at times. And also we need to treat it as a priority that we need to go through that level of self-care, because it is about making sure that we maintain and look after our mental well-being throughout the day and the night at all times. You cannot switch off from being you. You can switch off from being an employee, but you can never switch off from being you. And you are what you bring with you everywhere you go. So I think it's really important that we find those different mechanisms. Now, one of the things that I did in the level of creativism was I created what I call my tool bag. And I literally drew out a handbag that I wanted to design of what I wanted it to be. And not everybody would want to do this. What I put into that bag was names, it was things that helped to lift my spirits. It was songs, it was people that I like to talk to, whether that was my best friend. It was all kinds of different things that helped to lift my mood. So that if I needed to take 5 minutes away, if I needed to go and do something to lift my spirits that was self-care, that I just had something that was visual and helped me to think, well, actually, I haven't done that for a while. Let me try that out. Okay, I'm going to have a candlelit bath. That's not something I would have on a regular basis, but it was about making sure I was scheduling that self-care and being intentional, because actually it wasn't the most natural thing for me to do, to put myself first. And that's what many women do. Many times we're in the workplace, we're thinking about the workload, we're thinking about other people, we're thinking about families, and sometimes we neglect ourselves in the middle of that. So it's really important that we try to find things to do that will help us in our mental well-being, which ultimately help us to become a lot more productive throughout the day. If I don't get no sleep, it's a problem for everyone, I think, is one of the things I often say. So the other thing is team support. And when we start to talk about team support and our whole selves, it's about really how are we checking in on each other. It is about, are we going to have those, you know, if we can meet up, and we can't do that at the moment because we're on lockdown, but are you going for a walk with a colleague? Are you going to go for lunch with a colleague? Talking about the social distance meetups. And actually now that we are away, it is things that you can do and have that 5-minute check-in. So I know within my diary, I have coffee break. And in the coffee break, I have a Teams meeting with a set group of people. And we know once a week, we're going to check in for at least 20 minutes. Everyone's going to have their cup of tea with them. And we're just going to have a chat. How are you doing? How's things for you? And just really checking in with each other to make sure that we're all okay, because we're not seeing each other in the normal day-to-day way that we were operating. And it's those non-work related chats that I think do make a difference and help us to sort of lift our spirits and check in with each other and see how everybody else is doing. You can do the quizzes. The other thing that I've started to do to connect with people has been the council system. We have Yammer, so I do a lunchtime every now and then. We'll do Ask Me Anything, where whether it's the deputy leader, cabinet members, person from public health, people can just check in and ask them anything. And that works really well for people because it feels like a safe space and people are sharing their tips and ideas of what they really want to do and can do. So I think that's also very important that we make those daytime events even when it's busy. And I know for our team, we get together in the evening once a month. And we just literally, it's a catch up, whether it's going to be a quiz, it's usually a chat, it's usually someone brings their drink with them, whatever it is, but just those informal moments that you don't get anymore from being, not being in the office. So this is the bit where I talk about actually manager support and getting to know your teams if you are a manager. And although it might sound structured, having a wellness action plan, but I think it's really important that as individuals, and particularly if you're line managing people, that we really start to get to know each other, particularly more so in this space. And it's about those things that finding out about individuals, what is it that makes them get stressful? It's about being able to just articulate that, you know, what are the best strategies for people? And making sure that we're intentional about checking in with each other on a regular basis, finding out what is it that helps to keep people mentally healthy. Is it that one person needs to have a break at a certain number of time? Is it that we need to build in a level of flexibility? There's lots of different strategies that you can have, and building them into a plan and actually having that conversation around wellness is really, really vital. The team that I work with in terms of my cabinet support, we really understand each other very, very well. They know the type of things that would make me even more stressful. I understand them and what makes their things stressful for them. And I also understand what they need to do in order to balance that out. So every now and then we have those flexible things where I might get an email or a text or a call that just says, just logging out for 15 minutes, but, you know, I'll be back at such and such a time. Or, you know, just really having that real good conversation. And it's about being able to identify those early warning signs. And it's really like a prevention, really. I think it's really important that we be able to identify those in other people. And when you get to understand people's patterns and the way that they operate, these things can help you to bring them back on track. So I guess really the wellness action plan is almost like what I said before, of where I had my own medicine bag, so to speak, of all the things that help me in terms of my strategies. But this is a way of articulating it with your managers, and so that you can get the right support so that we can do that in the workplace, which I think can be fundamentally very, very helpful, and particularly in the context of the current climate. And getting to know your team members. It's also in COVID at the moment, because we're in a very different environment. It's about thinking back at the things that you used to do that when you was in the office, what is it that made you feel better? Now, when it came to being and supporting my work colleagues, one of the things that I have this little phrase is, I want to be like Jeff. And just to explain that in one of the offices, there's a coffee machine and there's a person that works there called Jeff. And everybody walks through that office and we all get a coffee from time to time and we'll have the informal chat with Jeff. And then there was a standard joke that on one day he would be Dr. Jeff, because we'd be telling him our problems and, Jeff, I just need to work this out, or what do you think of this? I just want to pick your brains. And then the other days we would call him Reverend Jeff, because we just felt like we was confessing all the things that had gone wrong and what we hadn't done or whatever. But that was really important. It was about, Jeff was always that ear, and it was someone that we would go to. So when Jeff wasn't there, I used to write on a sticky note and stick it on his monitor and say, missed you today, and I missed my hot chocolate with Jeff. And since being on COVID, I realised that actually that was one of my coping mechanisms, was having that 5-minute chat at the coffee machine. So every now and then, I literally just phone him up and just say, I've just phoned to have my hot chocolate with Jeff, which is basically, I'm checking in with Jeff to see if he's okay, because he's working at home too. How's he feeling? We're having a really quick informal chat, and it just works. And it's just about lifting each other up. So then we look at 8 ways managers can support their employees with their mental health. And I think I've covered some of that. The first one is actually around demystifying the whole thing of this profession, you know, this manager of perfection. Sometimes it is okay to be vulnerable in front of people, and particularly when it comes to the pandemic. Everybody has struggles, and we all need to be honest. And I think about when you lead by example and people see that we're all normal, we all go through the average things, but you can then start to have an environment and create that vibe where it's okay to talk about wellness, and that it's becoming a very natural thing for us to do. I know that I was in a session yesterday where I got invited to by Housing, which was online, and I had to deliver my message to the workforce that worked in the housing team. And one of the questions was what are the things that you think were your biggest achievements over the course of the pandemic? And one of them, I said, was just maintaining, because actually there was times and it was very stressful. And I know it's not just me. I know that you're going through that also as a workforce. It's about modeling healthy behaviours and making sure that you support that ethos, that people should prioritise self-care and also set the boundaries. Tell people that you have a mindfulness session, or that you do think you meditate or things like that, because it will give people ideas and actually make people realise we're not robots, we're all just normal. And then bring in a culture of connection through check-ins, like what I said when I said I just wanted to be like Jeff, and actually go beyond just how are you. So I know there's times where my cabinet support team, we get together on Teams, and literally I can tell you now who's just decorated, because we've had that conversation, you know, oh, my partner's doing this, it's just got on my nerves a bit, and I find it really hard to focus on doing this piece of work because there's X, Y, and Z going on. I've not been feeling too well. Actually, have you thought about taking a little bit of time off and having those little bit of informal conversations? So it's not moving away from the work and the day-to-day, but it's just making sure that we are being intentional with each other and ourselves in that moment. And offering the flexibility. Number 4 is offering flexibility and to be inclusive and include people, and actually finding out and understanding people's behaviour. And once you do that, you learn so much about the informals, the way that people are. I know that there was a point where, from this sort of methodology and people having that vibe and being open with each other, there was a moment when I was on a meeting and somebody was presenting, they wasn't presenting the way that they would normally. And even in this team's environment, and I could pick up on the change and in their behaviour, and it was only small subtle things, but I also know that they told me they'd had a bereavement recently. So that meant that I could just kind of text their manager and just say, can you just check in with such and such and just make sure that they're okay? Because I understood that he wasn't necessarily the person that would automatically do that. And every now and then we just need a reminder to check in on each other and have those offers of flexibility and be inclusive. Again, communication more than you think you need to. And it is, again, but keep saying this, is about being intentional. And one of the things that I have to do to make sure that I am being intentional is that I purposely look out for the moments to make sure that I help people to see that they are appreciated in local government and the work that they're doing. So every Friday, I think of someone who has done something that week, and I will send them an email just to say, I note what you did. It hasn't been forgotten. We appreciate what you've done. I hope you're okay. If you need anything, just come and contact me or have a chat. If I know someone's going through something that's particularly difficult, it's just having and sending those informal messages and making sure that we can do that. And as an organisation, making sure that there's pillars of support. And you know, within Birmingham City Council, we've made sure that there's things available on the intranet that people can go to for those levels of support. And another thing that we've done is also thought about all the things that affect the whole being inside and outside of work. So now we know that there's things online where people can go to if they are struggling financially, if they are going through domestic abuse, that the spaces that they can go to get information, to get ideas, to get information, and make sure that they're catered for. And it's about giving them options that they don't need to always disclose straight away if they don't want to, but we're making sure that we're thinking about their overall well-being within the organisation and making sure that we're helping people to be their best at work. And that includes investing in the training, which is number 6, and looking at that personal resilience, life transitions, healthy lifestyles training, modular courses, e-learning that people can just tap into on their spare time and have to go through. And they're quite informative, and you can find a basis to speak around them in your team meetings and making sure that we're telling people that they are there. And I think I've covered a little bit of the policies and procedures, but again, it's about making sure that we're making sure staff know that things are there, that we're being intentional, that we're actually saying that your mental health and well-being is a priority, and that those things are easy to find if you want to get to them. And number 8, it's about asking staff through surveys and different forms. Those things on a scale of 1 to 10, I make sure that when I log on, I know that our system pops up and someone pops up in the morning to tell me the tasks that I need to look at, but also the amount of time that I've been spending on the internet or on the actual email system. So it's really important that we have check-in points for staff so that they can actually monitor themselves, how they're feeling, but also do the surveys and let us know and give us their ideas about what we need to do to amend what we're doing as a council to support their needs as well. So communication is absolutely key throughout all of that, or throughout all of this. And making sure again that it's a genuine offer of flexibility. To be the best employer is to be a flexible employer. And if we want to grow people through their leadership roles, through who they are as individuals, women in local government, the best way to nurture people is to have a flexible approach to how we do things on a day-to-day basis. So we know that a lot of companies at the moment are looking at different ways to do that. And I think it's about making sure that there are check-in points where the organisation is asking, how is COVID-19 impacting employees at home? Is leadership addressing and acknowledging the impact of stress on employees? And if so, how? I know that when it came to, in my portfolio, I have bereavement services. And although as cabinet members were not involved in the day-to-day running of the operational, I did intentionally make sure that I asked the service manager, what are we doing to make sure that people's mental well-being is being looked after in such a difficult period of time? And then they went away and spoke to HR about, you know, can we make sure that there's some counselling or some support that's made available for different people on different teams within the workforce? And it's making sure that, again, that we are intentional in that space, and that the workplace culture is accepting of a flexible working arrangements. So we're not putting things in so they feel rigid and false. Like today at the team meeting, for the first 10 minutes, we're all going to talk about how we are. Nobody's going to actually operate in that sort of environment, but it's about making sure you create the right vibe, so to speak, so that people feel like they can actually check in and be real and authentic about who they are in the workplace, as an employee, as a leader, as a manager, in every course of them. Because what we want is people to be their whole selves when they are at work, and that is when you do get the best out of people. And that's how we grow, is when we're nurtured to the greatest of our abilities. So I think, you know, How can leadership do better and support employees in a manner that's a win-win? It's about being conversational, making sure that we're being flexible and that it is an absolute genuine offer that is there laid out on the table. So final bit I'll go into, and then I'll go into questions and answers if there's any that we have, is other considerations. Does your employer have a health and wellbeing strategy? Find out from your HR team if they do. If they don't, then maybe it's something that you can suggest. If there is, and you don't think that it particularly works for you or works for women that you're working around or different people within the workplace, there is nothing wrong with putting yourself forward and making those suggestions. Some of the best ideas that come out are those that are organically grown from the workforce, if it's about the workforce. Women who are in predominantly caring roles often don't spend much time caring for themselves. And that's something that we need to really be making it okay at work to talk about. Like I said, the self-care and making sure that that's okay for us to do that. So that's really important in that aspect. And having a strategy that focuses on mental health, financial health, and all those different things that affect us when we go back into the workplace. And the things to think about, training around mental health for first aiders to spot potential issues. The best thing we always say is if we know in advance that we can help and support you all the way through. There's nothing worse than people having to wait until they are actually in crisis point. And then us having a responsibility that we have someone that we can talk to as women in the local government, that we can go and say that, you know what, I'm not feeling great today, or things are not going particularly well, and making sure that we have that peer-to-peer support that's in a very trusted space. There's a thing around setting up the weekly walks around lunchtimes to encourage people to take breaks and keep fit, and where you can check in, and just really recognising that in the different phases of the year, we have different needs, and our mental health well-being will change over that course. I know for myself, being at home, I've really missed some of the people that I share the office with who I didn't particularly think I would miss as much, but I make sure now that I check in with them on a regular basis. So it's making sure we've got people to talk to and we can do those different things. Run the financial health seminars. People will find it useful, particularly in the current climate. And, you know, those that are going through struggles, it's okay for us to do that. It will help them to perform better at work if they're not stressing about other things that are going on. And provide access to a GP or other health services or anything else that we can do in terms of occupational health to make sure that people have options that they can go to. It's important to run a health and wellbeing survey, like I said, to gauge staff and find out where they are. And the next thing I want to talk about is be good enough. And I think this is for all of us as individuals. People often confuse high achieving behaviour with perfectionist behaviour. High achievers are dedicated, determined individuals who have a strong desire to accomplish something that's important to them. Their achievements are not about what other people will think of them or a fear of failure. And I think sometimes that when we strive for perfectionism, sometimes we confuse it and actually we're fearful of failure. And that's no way to live, to work. And instead of being purpose-driven, we almost can become driven on the avoidance of failure. And that's something that we need to move away from and actually make sure we're creating an environment where, one, there's not a blame culture. So people find that, you know, if you're failing, if something goes wrong, then it's going to be a huge issue. But also that, you know, we're normal everyday people and things will happen. You know, we are human. There are going to be things where things will go wrong, and we just have to be balanced in that way. And I've also on this slide, it says people who deem themselves perfectionists, on the other hand, are not driven by the pursuit of perfection. And some of this stuff you can look up and it's a reality. So we really need to be moving away from those things that trigger us, and we're looking at being that perfect employee, perfect leader, because Superwoman doesn't really exist in that particular realm, in that way. it's very easy for us to be linked with depression, anxiety, eating disorders, and we need to make sure that we're looking after our healthy self wholly. There's something that I always run to look at nowadays, and there was the concept of, for those that work with the psychologist side, they'll talk about the concept of the inner child. And then I talk about the concept of the inner woman, and I call her Suzanne, believe it or not, because in my mind, it's who is it that I want to be? What's on my to-be list? Where are my values? What are the things I want to be remembered for? But ultimately, what are the behaviours that are going to help me to be the best of who I am? And rather than looking for a superhero characteristic that's superhuman, it's about building that ideal for yourself of being a realistic person that has multiple things to juggle throughout the day, whether that's at work, whether that's at home, in our home life, and ultimately just being the better you. My concept is always to be more as an individual rather than trying to be a perfectionist. And finally, one of the things that we do in Birmingham City Council is that we have Be Healthy webinar series that we're doing at the moment, particularly through COVID-19, because we absolutely recognise that the environment that people are living in now is very different to the normal day-to-day. We don't know what normal will actually look like. None of us have been through a pandemic, and there were key factors that we wanted to make sure that people could log on to and go to different webinars so that they could really check in on their well-being. So there was ultimate stuff around keeping COVID safe, washing your hands, testing and everything else. But then also there was the other things around long-term considerations, like those that were suffering in terms of blood pressure, diabetes, kidney, smoking, other habits, things that would be exacerbated in the current climate. And I guess the final thing I'll ask is more of a question for everyone that I want you to go away and think about is, how are you going to practice self-care and to prioritise yourself and your well-being? Because ultimately, no matter what goes on in our working week, no matter what goes on in the organisation, we are only human. There's only one thing that's guaranteed in life, and at the end of the day, the council will still continue, local government will still continue when we're not here. So we need to make sure that we are in the most, we're bringing our best and we're our most healthiest, and our well-being's being catered for. But ultimately, the best gift you can give to yourself is making sure that you have self-care strategies in place and that you prioritise you throughout your life, because that is when you give your best to everybody else. And everything and all the responsibilities that we have to do as individuals. And I guess the final thing that I would say that is, when it comes to being and working in local government, try to be like Jeff. Be that person that, you know, that will ask people how they're feeling, that will take the time out to have the cup of coffee with each other, and that will check in with each other on a day-to-day basis. Because when you do that, you get so much more out of it yourself as well. And it's really good to make sure that we're checking in on people. And sometimes it's those that we wouldn't normally check in on, making sure that, you know, you can schedule in like an online coffee or a call or a chat, because looking after each other in the workplace, we spend the majority of our time with our colleagues in the 24 hours that we get. So it's really about making sure we nurture each other and try to eliminate conflict within the workplace. And I'll take any questions. So I shall stop sharing my screen there.
Thank you very much for that, Sharon. I know we've got a number of comments and questions, and the first question has come from Catherine Macon, and she said, thank you so much for your honesty. I think that's really been appreciated, and she's saying how much the topic really resonates at the moment, and her team is currently very low on resilience. And being a small team, a number of the members are off work or reduced hours because of various health and social care related reasons. So she's really asking the question how she can support herself and her colleagues who are still at work, and those returning to work from time off, especially as we're still expected to deliver against targets, both as individuals and as teams. And I think, you know, we can probably all relate to that in this COVID world, that we're still delivering services and responding to COVID at the same time.
Absolutely. And I think we do. And again, I think it goes back to that thing that we need to be so intentional with ourselves and with each other, and taking responsibility for checking in on each other at the same time, scheduling in those formal spaces where you can do that. Like I say, I've got times in the diary that is slotted in, but I know I'm intentionally stopping to have those conversations with people that we wouldn't normally have at the coffee machine. And some of the people that I've actually done that with are people that I don't normally, I'm not saying I wouldn't speak to them on a day-to-day, but I don't normally engage with them. But I just know that some of them are older, so that they may be, they've had to shield. So it's just about being more thoughtful in that regard. And I think that if you are a manager, those little things, we know that if anything, it's more hectic at the moment in COVID. There's so much more to do. But as a manager, make sure that you articulate your appreciation for each other. Because when you get that email that says, you know, I really appreciate that you've done that and well done, and, you know, it does make a huge difference. So it's really getting to know each other again.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful, Sharon, in terms of what you've said there. And it struck me when you said that, you know, self-care is not being selfish, and that we need to be more like Jeff. I thought that was great. That example of Jeff was great. I know that Nicole Griffiths has said, brilliant, thank you so much. Loads of really helpful advice, and it's true, and it's really, really fantastic. You know, great advice. And I was interested in when you spoke about that point when you realised that you weren't caring for yourself.
I went from self-care to no care, and I think that when those pressures come on, it's very easy that can happen.
Absolutely, and in terms of making that change that you did to back to self-care, was that something that happened overnight? Can you say something about actually, you know, how you did that?
I think it was about, again, it was that moment, and I think we all need to have this point where you just stop to check in with yourself. And it was literally having a word with myself, because I'd run upstairs with the laptop, it was on mute, and I needed to go to the toilet, but I needed to listen to what was happening in the meeting. And I thought, actually, that's enough now. You know, we're in a pandemic, but you don't need to create another crisis within your own home. So I decided, I'm quite a person that will look at different strategies for myself anyway. I like to do that. And I literally drew this bag, and that's literally what it was. And it was writing down all the things that help me on a normal day-to-day, or actually what are the things that I normally would enjoy and I feel great about. Was it listening to music? I like to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, so going to the gym at 6 was probably the best thing that I could do. And it was just putting all those things in and having something visual to remind me that I needed to be intentional, that said, Sharon, you need to do that. I was almost treating it like it was a new diet, in all actual, creating new habits.
Yeah, that does sound really powerful, that visual intention that you've just spoken about. And how long, in terms of that shift, how long did it take you to do? Because I mean, because you're making so many changes, I guess, you know, you couldn't do it overnight. But did you have a quite a quick impact? Because even the diarising sort of like time to check in with others, or just have a bit of time for yourself was really important.
So the first thing in terms of the diary, because I have cabinet support, I had to have a conversation with Nikki, who manages my diary, which was, I need you to schedule things in. And even if a meeting is at 10 past instead of at o'clock, then that's what needs to happen. So there was that. I also had to have another conversation with her, which is, Nikki, I know my own self, so I need you to be strict with me. So if I say, oh, just pop it in there, Nick, it's okay, I need you to say no.
Yes.
That's not how we're managing your diary today. So it's about that level of strictness and discipline. So that was the key things in terms of the work practice. The leader of the council, I was very honest with him. I phoned him up and said, look, mate, if you don't want a miserable Shazza this week, then I need to fit in some changes, and it's going to be better for everyone. So it's about making sure you can have that honest conversations with the people around you. And with the medicine bag, it wasn't about trying to do everything at once. It's literally, I'm going to do that today. I'm going to do that today. I'm not doing that today. So it's just about like a bit of a pick and mix.
Okay, that's really helpful. That's really helpful, and I'm sure that lots of attendees, you know, on this conference are going to take real notes from what you're actually saying. Then I thought as well, another strong point for me was when you were talking about a member of staff that you were interacting with digitally, and you noticed the subtle changes in their behaviour that made you go back to their manager and say, or can you check in on that person? So, and I think that's so important in this digital world, to actually look for those subtle changes in people's behaviour as well. Because, you know, your point about it's okay to be vulnerable, not everyone's at that stage of being okay with being vulnerable, and so it's important to spot when people are not necessarily seeing themselves that they may need a bit of a helping hand.
Yes, totally. And I think at first it's quite difficult online to understand people's behaviours, because it's such a false economy. It feels like sometimes when you're doing this all the time, but after a while you get used to how people present. And it was something really small. It was just that she was stuttering in a different way. She looked at and she was kind of second guessing things, and I thought, that's not her. And it wasn't massive things, it was just something so small, and it was just literally, can you check in? And it wasn't, it's not about bashing the manager for not thinking of it of themselves. It was just that I had an observation and I just passed it on. So, and in the end, you know, he did, and they had a good conversation about making changes.
And which is great. And I've got a couple of comments as well. So Dipty's actually said, thank you, Sharon. It's not usual for a member to be involved with council staff health and wellbeing. Great tips. So thanks for that. And we've also got another point from an anonymous attendee who said, how do you deal with the feeling that if you do need to take time off, that the workload that you will come back to will have been built up to the point where you feel that it's easier not to take the time off?
So that is a difficult one, and it's one that I've suffered with, particularly with the portfolio as well. And if I put it in the context of those that work with me, sometimes I just say, Nick, it's okay. Like, honestly, you can do that tomorrow. I don't want to see you on an email. There's nothing worse for me as a cabinet member is when I get a response from an officer at 10 o'clock at night. I email them back and say to them, work-life balance and all that. And they know exactly what I'm talking about. So it's just about being intentional. And again, having that open conversation with your line manager. If it's unmanageable, it is unmanageable. We have to start having those conversations, because if you want the best out of people, we have to give them the best resources and situation. It might be someone else on the team can take some of the workload. Just to give you another example, my comms officer, who's absolutely amazing, and I've got a big portfolio, but we had homelessness, we had bereavements in the COVID context, which was bringing a lot of inquiries, and we just said it's too much, so we got someone else in to help her on a different element of the portfolio. So it's just about being honest conversations. For me, I'd rather honest conversations than unnecessary surprises.
Absolutely, that comes across really strongly from you, Sharon, about that point about honesty and authenticity, and that's really fantastic. And Carol Greenway said that she can really resonate with the last question as well. So clearly, you know, that you're actually pressing a lot of buttons in the sense of, you know, connecting with people with what you're actually saying, which is really fantastic, Sharon. So thank you very much. I can't see any more comments at the moment, but I've got to say that again, so much within what you actually said, which is practical, which is helpful, you know, really fantastic practical things that we can actually do in our working lives. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here, and it's really appreciated.
Thank you very much. Thank you for hosting me and everyone else that's taken part in the session.
All right, thanks Sharon. Thank you.
Thank you.